That good, that good. Let me pray for us, and we'll get into this. Father, I just pray, Lord, that you would speak to us, that you would encourage us, that you would challenge us, Lord. And Lord, remind us who you are. So, Father, we thank you for that time of worship, of just focusing on your goodness and how you always persevere and how you always prevail. May we be reminded of that as we look upon your word today. We thank you and we praise the name of Jesus. Amen. I want to thank the worship team for leading us in that set. That was a good reminder, because it is actually a very good juxtaposition to what we'll be going through the text. Because this is a part of the Gospel of Mark where things get really kind of down, right? Like last week, we had the Lord's Supper and Jesus predicting Peter's denial, and now we're getting into, Gethsemane. We're getting into Peter actually denying Christ, and then next week is actually kind of the Good Friday message, because next week is when he's on the cross, right? And then 2 weeks from then is the Easter message that we were supposed to have a few weeks ago, but that's when Jesus is resurrected. So right now we're kind of in that part of the text where things are not looking so great. Things are looking very grim, okay? And so with that, a bit of a downer thought, but just to kind of get you in the frame of mind, when was the time you were most disappointed by others or even yourself? It's something I don't want you to say out loud because it might be kind of embarrassing. But I want you to just think of a season where you were just very disappointed by maybe someone that you trusted in, someone that you thought had your back, and they didn't follow through, right? Or maybe it was even in yourself where you had such high expectations and desires and ambitions and things you wanted to do, but you just couldn't get it done, right? And you didn't just disappoint yourself, you disappointed many others in the process, right? Maybe you've gone through seasons like this. And maybe for some of you, this might be relatively recent, right? So I just want you to just think about, when was that time when, I was disappointed? When was that time when I was discouraged? Because this is a season of this part of the story that we're getting into right now. So with that, let's look at Mark 14. We're going to finish the rest of the chapter of Mark 14, verses 32 to 72. Open up your Bible, smartphones, or look at the screen. Mark 14, starting with verse 32. Where the Lord says this: They went to a place called Gethsemane, and Jesus said to his disciples, "Sit here while I pray." He took Peter, James, and John along with him, and began to be deeply distressed and troubled. "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death," he said to them. "Stay here and keep watch." Going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible the hour might pass from him. "Abba, Father," he said, "everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will." Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. "Simon," he said to Peter, "are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Once more he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They did not know what to say to him. Returning the third time, he said to them, "Are you still sleeping and resting? Enough! The hour has come. Look, the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer." Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared. With him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs, sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard." Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, "Rabbi," and kissed him. Then seized Jesus and arrested him. Then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. "Am I leading a rebellion," said Jesus, "that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me, but the scriptures must be fulfilled." Then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the teachers of the law came together. Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest. There he sat with the guards and warmed himself at the fire. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so that they could put him to death, but they did not find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Then some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days will build another not made with hands. Yet even then their testimony did not agree. Then the high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Again the high priest asked him, are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One? I am, said Jesus. And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses, he asked. You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think? They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, prophesy! And the guards took him and beat him. While Peter was below in the courtyard, one of the servant girls of the high priest came by. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked closely at him. You also were with that Nazarene Jesus, she said. But he denied it. I don't know or understand what you're talking about, he said, and went out into the entryway. When the servant girl saw him there, she said again to those standing around, this fellow is one of them. Again he denied it. After a little while, those standing near said to Peter, surely you are one of them, for you are a Galilean. He began to call down curses, and he swore to them, I don't know this man you're talking about. Immediately the rooster crowed the second time. Then Peter remembered the word Jesus had spoken to him. Before the rooster crows twice, you will disown me 3 times. And he broke down and wept. Okay, like I said, this is a very downer passage, right? Because this is the part of the story where things are not looking so great. But just a reminder, for this year our theme is the gospel of freedom. So our hope is that each and every one of us can experience a greater freedom through Jesus Christ, through the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so last week, as we covered the first part of chapter 14, we saw that in that Last Supper, that Passover feast, that Jesus was basically telling his disciples, I am the next Passover the Lamb. I, just like the first Passover, will bring freedom and salvation to my people. And right here we start off with Gethsemane. Right? Now last week I talked about how, that word alabaster jar has like this deep meaning, and I think Calvin even put it on his Facebook to see whether people would actually respond to it the way I said they would. I guess you don't have enough holy friends because you only have a few responses. But this same thing, you could write the word Gethsemane as your Facebook status, right? And people are like, oh man, you're going through a tough season, man. I'm praying for you, right? They won't like it. They'll be like, oh, I'm with you, brother. And so this is again a word that carries a deep meaning to Christians because everyone knows where this story comes from, right? This is Jesus' last few moments before the cross where he is pleading with God the Father. And Gethsemane actually just means like oil press. Right? There's really no significant meaning in the word, but the word itself has such a deep meaning to Christians now because they picture this as that struggle with Jesus. And even the Gospel of Luke talks about how Jesus was praying with such stress and with such fervor that he was like dropping like drops of blood were coming out for sweat. Right? That's actually a medical condition that only comes from extreme stress. And so Jesus talks about this. He tells his disciples, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He's expressing how difficult this season is, knowing what he's about to go into, knowing the weight that he is carrying with him, knowing that he will not only suffer physically, but he's about to suffer even this spiritual death, right? This separation from his Father. And he's grieving in this moment. And he reaches out to his disciples. He says, keep watch and pray with me. Right? Be there for me. And they overhear him praying this. Abba, Father, everything is possible for you. take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. So Jesus is saying, you know what, if there's another way, let's do this. But if this is what I need to do, then I will. Right? It is all about you, Father. I will obey. But at the same time, this is not easy. Right? And they hear this. Obviously, they heard this because someone wrote it down. Right? So these three guys, they hear this, and they're like, honestly, right? So Jesus is praying fervently, and he's expressing such sorrow. And he's just reaching out to his Father. And in the midst of this, they failed him 3 times. 3 times he goes to them and says, please, just keep watching, pray with me. Are you still asleep? Right? He keeps going to them, and they fail him 3 times. This is Peter, James, and John. This is his inner circle. These are his boys, right? This is his entourage. And yet they can't even watch him pray. Right? Now, it's not like they were going to stop what happened. It's not like if they happened to be watching, like, hey, there's people coming, let's get out of here. Right? It's not like they were going to stop what was coming. But Jesus was still asking them, be there for me. Pray with me. Keep watch. And 3 times they failed him. And so Judas shows up, and this is important because you have to remember, this is the season of Passover. This is a big season where people are coming all around the world into Jerusalem to celebrate this festival together. And so they needed Judas to show them who Jesus was. Because they were out in the fields, and there were many people who were camping out in the fields for Passover, so that they needed a sign, right? And so this is where you have that, like, the betrayer's kiss. Now, there are a couple things. First off, remember Jesus said, it's better for this man not to even to be born, right, when he was talking about Judas. I don't think anyone has been named Judas after that moment, right? Like have you ever met a Judas? That's like one of those names, like no one would ever name their name Judas. Interestingly, a lot of people name Jesus, Jesus. But not so much Judas, right? And so Judas comes with this betrayer's kiss, and maybe I'm wondering, this is just me being stupid, but I don't see guys kiss much anymore, because this is that betrayer's kiss where he is identified by them, and this armed crowd, the swords and clubs come, and they take Jesus. Right? That's the sign. And so, as I talked about last week, the schemes of men. Right? They were scheming from the beginning of chapter 14. We're going to get Jesus, we're going to kill him, right? In the middle of chapter 14, Judas comes on board. They're like, yes, we have an inside man. And so the question is, did they win? They got Jesus. Right? They snatched him. Their plans worked. So did evil win? Interestingly, they're arresting him at night, and they're arresting him away from the public eye. Jesus even calls this out. He's like, all these times I have been publicly out preaching in front of people, teaching them, and yet you did nothing. Why are you coming to me now? Am I leading a rebellion? Right? Why are you coming to me like a criminal? But they do this away from the public eye, and they secretly snatch him away in the night. Right? With this large, it's probably the temple guard, with this large militant crowd. And in that moment, all of his disciples, what it says in the passage is, everyone deserted him and fled. Everyone that was with Jesus, these people they weren't just accompanying him, many of these people had been with Jesus for years, ministering with him, following him, learning from him. They all ran away. And this is where the title for the passage comes from, because in verse 51 to 52 it says, a young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus. When they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. First off, why is this man only wearing a linen garment? Right? What was he thinking? Like, oh, that's all I need. Like, seriously, it's like a blanket, right? That's literally what he was wearing. But anyway, so this guy, he is in such a fervent fear of what is going on that he literally runs away naked. Now, most people think that this is actually the author of the Gospel of Mark, John Mark. Right? Most people believe that John Mark, when he is writing this rather silly story of a young man running around naked, that was him. And also, the interesting thing about Mark is he also doesn't talk about who cut the servant's ear, right? So he doesn't name himself, he doesn't name Peter. Interestingly, none of the Synoptic Gospels name Peter, Matthew, Mark, or Luke. But John does. John's a little tattletale. John's like, guys, it was Peter. You know how angry he is. He cut the ear off. And so, John's the one who tells everybody who Peter, that Peter was the one who did this. But Mark doesn't. He doesn't talk about who did what. He just says, this is what happened. But at the end of the day, what was most important was Jesus was taken away. And everyone deserted him. Everyone. His disciples, these men that he had trusted, these men that he had trained, these men who had ministered with him, who he had sent out 2 by 2 and done amazing things, these men all ran away. And so really that's the main highlight of this part of the chapter, is that these people that have been raised up to be, Jesus' disciples, right? These are like the OGs. These guys all failed. And we've seen this throughout the text. Really, in the second part of the Gospel of Mark, what we're seeing more and more is just the flaws of his followers. We saw that all throughout, as they seem to be getting really big on themselves, like bragging about who's better than the other, and they're boasting with each other. They're going up to Jesus and asking, hey, can I be at your right, my brother be on your left? Like, they're asking ridiculous things. And here we see, in the moment where where things hit the fan, where things are getting really deep and dark, they run away. That's what this chapter is really showing, is that the schemes of men seem to be winning out, and the followers of Jesus seem to be amounting to nothing. And here's the interesting thing. If that is John Mark, that young naked man, if that is John Mark, this is not the only time he will fail. If you know the story from the book of Acts, he's part of the first missionary journey with Paul and Barnabas, right? He's actually Barnabas' cousin, I believe. And so they go out on this missionary journey, the first of its kind. They're going to all these different cities all throughout the Roman Empire. And Mark quits in the middle of the trip. I think I got Pamphylia. He's like, you know what, guys, I'm going back home. And he goes back home. And then they're about to go on the second trip. So this is Acts 15. At the end of the Jerusalem Council, Paul's like, okay, it's time for us to go again. And Barnabas is like, why don't we take my cousin Mark again? Paul's like, no, I don't want that quitter with me. And they actually break up. So Paul and Barnabas, this ultimate combo, right? This is like the dynamic duo. They split ways. Barnabas takes Mark with them, and Paul takes this guy Silas, and they split ways. And that's how the second missionary journey starts. Now we see throughout the rest of the biblical text that Mark and Paul end up patching things later. And we see that when Paul writes about Mark in some of his other letters, he writes very highly of him. So we see that at some point there was reconciliation. But in Acts 15, Paul wanted nothing to do with Mark. And so we see in that moment that Mark, he didn't fail just that one time when he's running around naked. He failed on the mission field. Right? To a point where it broke a relationship. Where he broke up Paul and Barnabas. And so this is a man that he's experienced many disappointments in himself. Right? That he couldn't stay with his Lord during this time of crisis. And he couldn't handle that first missionary trip. And he ended up being a source of division. Now, I made an argument when I preached on this text a couple years ago, that even though it was a split up of two amazing men, it wasn't division, it was multiplication. God was using that to send out more teams than if it was just the two of them. Right? So there was something divine that was going on there. But in that moment, Mark was a failure, yet again. And so just continuing through the text, you see the Sanhedrin draw these people together, and they are putting on this ridiculous trial, right? Where it's obvious that No one knows what they are talking about. It's like they're just finding random people to like say things about Jesus, and no one is saying the same thing. It's like, they're just making things up. Yeah, that there Jesus, he said the temple going to get destroyed in 3 days. Right? And then this other guy's like, he said 30 days. It's like, they're just bringing up these people that are not agreeing, and they're obviously being put up there to condemn a man for things that he has not done. And it's ridiculous. But here's what Jesus does speak out about. In the end, what gets Jesus put on trial, what gets Jesus sentenced to death, is that he would not deny his deity. When the high priest asks him, are you the Messiah? Right? Are you the Son of the Holy One? Jesus says, I am. And those of you who know, just that statement, I am, in many ways, is a statement of deity. Right? That is the name of God itself. Yahweh means I am. You even see in the Gospel of John when the actually at Gethsemane, when the soldiers come to take Jesus, and they ask him, where is Jesus? And he says, I am. That host of soldiers all fall to the ground. Right? There is power when Jesus proclaims, I am. It is not simply him saying who that he is, but it's him just making an exclamation point on his deity. And so you see, even in the midst of a season where Jesus should be afraid, where Jesus should be fearful about what is to come, he boldly proclaims who he is. And he says, you will see the Son of Man, right, on the clouds. Like, he's singing Hosanna, right? So it's like this is who Jesus is. He does not fear man. And he proclaims who he is without hesitation. And this is what puts him on death row. He is claiming to be God. And then the story ends with Peter doing exactly what Jesus said he was going to do. Peter sitting in that courtyard, everyone's like, hey, you look familiar. We saw you with that guy Jesus. You're from Galilee. Aren't you part of that crowd? And they keep calling him out, and he keeps denying him. And just like I said last week, right? That 3-time denial is an absolute denial. Right? And he's doing this in front of all these things that are going on. And then that rooster crows twice, and Peter runs away ashamed. Like I said, this is a downer text. What is this really showing us? Question again. Did evil win? They got their man. Their plan worked perfectly. They hired that man Judas. They gave him his 30 pieces of silver, and he delivered. And they even found a reason to kill this man, because this man was proclaiming that he is God. So did evil win? You guys gotta stop laughing at this picture. Did evil win? But anyway, so that's the question that stands here today. And so what I want us to focus on in applying this to ourselves is, first I want us to be reminded that I can guarantee you that you will suffer disappointment. I bet you already have. And I will guarantee you that you will suffer many more disappointments to come. Whether this is in others or whether it's in yourself. Now in this story, in this chapter, Jesus is experiencing a lot of disappointments in his disciples. Right? 3 times they fail him when he's praying and asking them to pray with him and to keep watch. 3 times Peter denies Jesus, just as he predicted. And so we are seeing failure after failure after failure. So what I want to tell you guys is, this is something that we are going to experience ourselves. And I already said, most of you have already experienced this at some point in your lives. There are people that you have expectations in that won't live up to them. And there are also expectations that you will have of yourself that you also may not live up to. So the question is, how do you respond in those moments of disappointment. And on the other side, there are many times it really seems like evil wins, right? Now, I don't know, I guess maybe for myself when I was in the workforce, when I was working as an engineer, there are times I would look and I would see the people that were rising up quickly in the ranks, getting those promotions. Most of us would call them evil. Like, you just know, like, you just talk to them, you meet with them, and you know that they are in it for themselves, right? I was an engineer. I have 3 patents to my name, and there was this one guy. I shouldn't name his name, so I won't name his name. But there's this one guy. You could tell he could not come up with any ideas on his own. But our company would give you bonuses for every patent you wrote. So like there was a financial benefit to getting your name on a patent. So what he would do is he would befriend everybody that had good ideas. And then he'd be like, okay, and then, like, he would get these meetings, and you would like sit and brainstorm and come up with an idea. And then next thing you know, you're writing a patent with him. And you're like, wait a minute. Like, you didn't do anything. Like, how did you get here? And like next thing you know, he's got like 20, 30 patents. You're like, what? And like there are people like that they know how to leverage systems, know how to manipulate things to advance themselves. And for myself, that was something I experienced often in the engineering field. I would see people that I questioned their morality, but I would see them advance because they knew the system. So just like you guys, many times it seems like evil wins. Now, just speaking a little bit frankly, one of the things that really interests me here in Korea is in the education system. I don't know, it's interesting. It seems like education, it's like there's a lot of gray in terms of what constitutes cheating, right? That basically, like, they even have the Korean word cunning, right? They even have their own word that kind of euphemizes like cheating, right? And it's really weird. Is that like it's like people will cheat and not feel any remorse. It's just kind of like this is how you get by, right? Something and like it bothered me because I wrestled with this with one of my roommates. And he was a seminarian just like me, right? So he was 1 year behind me in our seminary program, and what they were doing was, he's natively Korean, so he was struggling learning in English. But what he found out was that our professors, some of them would teach both Korean and English classes, right? But for whatever reason, the Korean class always got their exams the week before, and so he would get the exam from the Koreans, and it would literally be the same in English. When the professor gave it the next week, he just wrote it in English. And so it's like, he would get it beforehand, and they would know exactly what was coming up on the exam. And it wasn't just him, it was like this group of seminarians. And they would work on it together, and I would just challenge him, like, isn't this cheating, bro? Like, I don't understand. He's like, no, this is what we have to do. And I was just like, I don't understand. And then I also hear these stories about, like, especially in the States. In the States, like, there are a lot of Koreans that study abroad in the States, and so this is back in the day before the internet existed, or like floppy disks and back like that. They had like these floppy disks passing around that had papers from previous people. And actually, Pastor Leo can tell you about this, because he found out that his work was getting into that floppy disk somehow. He's like, I never gave it to anybody. Like, how did that happen? And so, like, it's really interesting that there's like this system of cheating that exists that people just kind of turn a blind eye to. And so it boggles my mind. But I think what I really want to get to, I don't want to sidetrack this completely, is that a lot of times it seems like the easiest way to advance is to follow what everyone else is doing. So that puts us as Christians into a moral dilemma. If we want to advance, do we allow ourselves to be immoral? Right? Is that okay? Now, I can't speak for every situation, because I know many people might disagree with me, but I will say, brothers and sisters, if you have the choice to do what is right or wrong, choose to do what is right, even if it hurts you in the process. As brothers and sisters, I will say that even though you might not get what you wanted, it is worth so much more. And so in this season, in this text, we are seeing evil winning. And I want to say, even though it seems like evil wins, choose to do good. Choose to do what is right before the Lord. And the odd thing about this is God often takes situations like this. He took the cross, and as we will see later, he turned it into something glorious, something amazing, something that we wear as a keychain, right? He often does this, where there are seasons of tragedies, and God turns it around into something beautiful. I don't know how many of you guys remember the Columbine incident. I'm dating myself when I talk about this. I was in college when this happened. Some of you were just being born. But the Columbine incident in Colorado in America, there were these high schoolers that amassed a large amount of guns, and they gunned down a lot of their classmates. It is a horrible tragedy. And unfortunately, there have been many copycats of that since. But that was the very first one that just shocked the world. Right? Interestingly enough, even in the midst of such a horrible, tragic event, one of the first reports coming out of that was that there was a huge revival in the churches in Columbine. That people were coming back to the Lord. People that had stepped away from the church many years ago were coming back. And interestingly, I actually got to meet a Columbine survivor. One of my friends is from Aurora, Colorado, and one of his friends was visiting, and this is back when we were in Texas, and she shared that she was a Columbine survivor. And I was like, that's crazy, like you were actually there, you lived through that. And so she shared a bit about her story, but how God was using her was, she was going around and sharing her testimony, and she was, she was being involved in a huge revival movement. Now, I'm not to say that something that tragic was just for the sake of a church revival. I think that's a sort of a belittling way to look at it. But what I will say is that even in the midst of tragedy, God brings something glorious. God can turn something that seems so evil and so unnecessary and make it into something amazing. He did that with the cross. We will see that as we get to it later. So what I really want us to be reminded of today is you will be disappointed at some point in your life, whether it's in others or whether it's in yourself. And some of you might still be stuck in that right now. What I want to tell you is don't stay there. You know, I've talked to people, and I've had friends that have stepped away from the faith because of things like this. I had a friend that he really felt God was opening the door for him to be a math teacher, and it just never happened. Like, he couldn't get through the certification, he couldn't pass certain exams, and ultimately he left the church. And it's because God didn't pony up, per se. So I've seen times where people can't get out of this season of dwelling on a disappointment, and instead their assumption is then either God doesn't exist or God hates me. And they walk away. What I want us to know is that God can redeem even our failures. God can redeem even our disappointments. John Mark himself, he is a testament to this, right? John Mark is that young naked man running away. John Mark is the one who failed and couldn't even complete the first missionary journey. It was too hard. He could have just disappeared from the face of the Bible, right? And no one would have ever thought anything of it. Oh, that naked guy, right? That's all they would think about it. But instead, he is now, exalted as one of the authors of the Gospels, right? And Paul himself speaks very highly of him. So he didn't give up. I'm sure
There are seasons where he was very down on himself on what he did. But he didn't give up. And God redeemed him. And speaking more personally, there are seasons where I have utterly failed. Right? Some people are like, what are you talking about? You've done everything. No. Right? I don't care about what specs I have. There are seasons where I have failed myself and disappointed myself. And there are seasons where I have come to God expecting wrath. Right? Have you ever been in that point where you realize you've done things you've done such horrible things that you deserve the wrath of God? I don't know if you've ever been in that season. I have. And other people were treating me like that, were treating me wrathfully. And I was like, I deserve this. But in those seasons, whenever I went to God and I went to Him in prayer and I expected punishment and wrath, all I felt was love. And all I felt was a God that wanted to pick me up off the ground. And I want to say the same to you, that if you're in that season where you are disappointed in yourself or you are disappointed in others, go to God, and I swear to you, He will come back and He will amaze you. He will encourage you. He will love you. And He will show you that even that failure will lead to something great. It might not be great in what you expected. It might not be exactly how you thought things would pan out, but it will still be great. Because that is who God is. And in the same season, in this text, you see these disciples fail again and again. Peter ends it off by completely denying that he knows Jesus and running away ashamed and in tears. But God turns this around. God would later restore Peter. We're not going to get to that in this text because it's not in the Gospel of Mark. But Jesus, He goes to Peter and He restores him. And Peter ends up being one of the pillars of the church. So what I want to encourage you guys today is, don't dwell in your disappointments. Don't dwell in your discouragement. Don't dwell on your failures. But trust in the one who always wins. Trust in the one who always prevails. That is God. That is God alone. Let's take some time to pray and we'll close for today. Let's take a moment to just I want you to take a moment to just think if there is something recent on your heart, a disappointment you had in someone else, or even in yourself. I want you to just pray right now that you would ask God to allow you to forgive that person or persons or yourself, and to just bring some resolution and reconciliation where there might still be brokenness. So if there is some type of disappointment or discouragement on your heart right now, I want you to pray that God would lift it off you and that you would seek forgiveness and reconciliation. Let's pray. In the midst of the disappointments, in the midst of persecution, Jesus never backed down. Jesus proudly proclaimed that He was God. So I want us to take a moment to pray that we wouldn't be distracted by these discouragements, that we wouldn't be distracted by these failures, but that we would instead continue to reflect and see who God is, and to know that He is working in our lives. So let's pray for that greater revelation of who God is in our lives, that we would see Him at work in every single step. Let's pray. Father, we thank you that you are good. We thank you that you are great. We thank you that you never give up. We just pray, Lord, that we would keep our eyes fixed on you, that you would give us a greater understanding of who you are today. That when disappointments come, when failures come, Lord, that we wouldn't doubt your goodness, we wouldn't doubt your greatness, we wouldn't doubt who you are, but that we would cling all the more to you, that we would depend all the more upon you. And Lord, that you would turn our mourning into dancing, that you would turn our defeat into joy. So help us, Lord, to keep our eyes fixed on you, and to know, Lord, that you can even redeem us